Imagine a machine powerful enough to light an entire city. Now imagine that the safety manual for that machine contained a lie. Not a mistake. A deliberate lie approved by the state, buried in classified documents, hidden from the engineers operating it every single day. On April 25, 1986, that lie killed 31 people directly, poisoned hundreds of thousands more, and triggered a chain of events that contributed to the collapse of the most powerful empire on Earth. This is the minute-by-minute story of Chernobyl, the crown jewel. To understand the disaster, you first need to understand what Chernobyl was. Built in the 1970s in northern Ukraine near the border of Belarus VI, Lenin nuclear power plant was the pride of the Soviet nuclear program. Right next door, they built Pripyat, a purpose-built city for the plant workers and their families. Swimming pools, amusement parks, a functioning supermarket. By Soviet standards, it was paradise. But underneath this utopia was a secret. The reactors used at Chernobyl were called RBMK reactors, and they had two fatal design flaws that the Soviet government classified as state secrets. Here's how they work. Nuclear reactors generate intense heat. Water is pumped in to cool them, creating steam, which drives turbines, which generates electricity. To control the heat, engineers use control rods made of boron. Think of them as the brakes on a car. Insert them and the reaction slows. Pull them out and it speeds up. The first flaw is called the positive void coefficient. In virtually every Western reactor, if the cooling water boils into steam, the nuclear reaction naturally slows down, a built-in self-correcting safety feature. In the RBMK, it is reversed. When water boils into steam, the reaction speeds up. More heat creates, more steam creates more heat. A runaway loop with no natural off switch. The second flaw is in the control rods themselves. The rods were made of boron, which slows the reaction. But to make them slide in faster, Soviet engineers tipped the bottom ends with graphite. Graphite accelerates a nuclear reaction. Picture this. You are driving toward a cliff. You slam the brakes. But your car is designed so that pressing the brake pedal hits the accelerator for 2 seconds before the brakes engage. At 30 miles per hour, you probably survive. 1 inch from the cliff, that 2-second delay kills you. The engineers operating reactor number 4 on the night of April 25th had no idea about either of these flaws. That information was classified. The perfect storm. The disaster actually began a full day before the explosion. The plant was scheduled to run a routine safety test to determine whether a spinning turbine could power the cooling water pumps during a brief power outage before backup generators kicked in. A standard test, delayed for years. On April 25th, as the day shift prepared to begin, a regional power controller called and asked them to delay again. A nearby city needed the electricity, so the test was postponed 10 hours. Because of the delay, the experienced day shift went home. The test was handed to the midnight crew. Engineers who had not been briefed on the procedure and were not expecting to run it. In the control room, 3 people mattered most. Leonid Toptanov, the senior reactor control engineer, 25 years old, just 2 months into the role. Alexander Akimov, the shift supervisor, and Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer overseeing the test. Dyatlov was brilliant and experienced. He was also a tyrant who did not accept pushback and was under intense pressure to complete the test before the scheduled maintenance shutdown. While the crew prepared, something invisible had been quietly building inside the core during those 10 delayed hours. Xenon-135. It is a natural byproduct of nuclear fission that builds up and absorbs neutrons, effectively choking the reaction. When Toptanov began lowering the reactor's power toward the 700 megawatt level needed for the test, the xenon took over entirely. The power collapsed. 500 megawatts. 200. 30. Near zero. The reactor had essentially shut itself down. The correct move was to abandon the test, wait 24 hours for the xenon to burn off, and reschedule. Akimov and Toptanov both said so. Dyatlov overruled them, threatened to fire them on the spot, and ordered them to pull the control rods almost completely out of the core to force the power back up. Safety regulations required a minimum of 15 rods inside the reactor at all times. Under Dyatlov's threats, the engineers withdrew nearly all of them. Only 6 remained. The reactor was now running at critically unstable power, stripped of almost all its controls, saturated with xenon. Then they started the test. 1:23 a.m. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, the test began. The The steam supply to the turbines was cut. The turbines began to spin down. The cooling water pump slowed. Less water entered the core. And then the RBMK's first fatal flaw activated. The slowing water began to boil. The steam increased the rate of the nuclear reaction. The reaction produced more heat. More heat produced more steam. The xenon burned away. The power began surging upward with nothing to stop it. At 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 40 seconds a.m., the power spike triggered catastrophic alarms across the control room. Akimov understood immediately. He reached for the AZ5 button, the absolute emergency shutdown switch designed to slam every single control rod back into the reactor simultaneously and kill the reaction instantly. At 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 41 seconds a.m., he pressed it. At 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 43 seconds a.m., the RBMK's second fatal flaw activated. The graphite tips of the control rods entered the reactor core first. Instead of breaking the reaction, they accelerated it. The power spiked to an estimated 30,000 megawatts, 10 times the reactor's maximum design capacity, in approximately 3 seconds. At 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 44 seconds a.m., the heat was so intense it instantly vaporized all the cooling water inside the core. The steam pressure built to a level the reactor structure could not contain. A massive steam explosion tore through the reactor building. The 2,000-ton biological shield covering the top of the reactor, a reinforced concrete cap the weight of a small skyscraper, was blown into the air and landed at an angle across the destroyed reactor core. Seconds later, a second explosion launched burning chunks of radioactive graphite and fuel across the plant grounds and onto the roof of the adjacent reactor number 3. The core of reactor number 4 was now open to the sky, venting a continuous geyser of radioactive particles into the atmosphere at a rate equivalent to 2 Hiroshima bombs every single hour. The invisible fire. Inside the shattered control room, Dyatlov went into psychological denial. Despite the missing roof visible from the building's windows, despite every instrument reading off the scale or destroyed, he insisted the core was intact. He sent young trainees into the reactor hall to manually verify. They looked down into the building and saw a glowing crater where the reactor had been. They absorbed lethal radiation doses within seconds of standing there. Outside, the firefighters of Pripyat arrived. They believed it was a standard roof fire. They wore canvas coats. They had no radiation suits and no dosimeters accurate enough to measure what they were standing in. They picked up pieces of burning graphite with their bare hands. They noticed a strange metallic taste. Their skin flushed red. Within hours, they were vomiting. Within weeks, many were dead from acute radiation syndrome, their internal organs destroyed by radiation that shredded DNA at the cellular level. The Soviet Union attempted to conceal the scale of the disaster. Pripyat, a city of 49,000 people, was not evacuated for 36 hours. The delay was driven by bureaucratic denial and political fear of admitting catastrophic failure. But the wind could not be classified. 2 days after the explosion, a nuclear plant in Sweden detected massive radiation spikes on the shoes of arriving workers. The secret was out. The cleanup required 600,000 men drawn from across the Soviet Union, conscripted soldiers, miners, firefighters, and workers known collectively as the Liquidators. When remote-controlled robots sent to clear radioactive debris from the roof had their circuits fried by the intense radiation, the Soviets replaced them with human beings. These men were given crude lead aprons and sent onto the roof in 90-second rotations. 90 seconds to run out, shovel 1 scoop of radioactive debris over the edge, and run back. The maximum time before absorbing a dangerous dose. Many did this dozens of times. Many suffered lifelong health consequences. The legacy. A massive concrete sarcophagus was built over the destroyed reactor within months. In 2016, the new safe confinement, a steel arch costing over $2 billion, was rolled over the original structure. It is designed to contain the site for 100 years. Beneath the ruins, the melted nuclear fuel mixed with concrete and sand to form a highly radioactive solid mass that flowed through cracks in the floors before cooling. It is called the elephant's foot. A photograph taken of it from close range in the years immediately after the disaster delivered a lethal dose of radiation within minutes. Dyatlov survived and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for criminal negligence. Valery Legasov, the chief scientific investigator, eventually told the world the full truth about the RBMK reactor's design flaws, information the Soviet state had suppressed for years. For speaking out, He was isolated and stripped of recognition. On April 27, 1988, exactly 2 years after the disaster, he took his own life. His recorded testimony, made before his death, became the foundation of the official account of what actually happened. Mikhail Gorbachev later said that Chernobyl was perhaps the single event most responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union. A system built on institutional silence, political fear, and the suppression of technical truth had produced a disaster that could no longer be hidden from its own citizens or the world. Chernobyl wasn't a failure of nuclear physics, it was a failure of honesty. Yet even today, Chernobyl is not truly over. The reactor is silent, but the consequences continue. Radiation does not care about politics, borders, or ideologies. It simply follows the laws of physics. Thousands of square kilometers of land were contaminated. Entire forests absorbed radioactive particles. One area became known as the Red Forest after radiation turned the pine trees a deep reddish brown before killing them. Many of those trees were later buried as radioactive waste. Wildlife disappeared at first. Then something unexpected happened. With humans gone, nature slowly returned. Wolves, lynx, wild horses, boars, and countless other species began reclaiming the exclusion zone. Children grew up hearing stories about towns that no longer existed. Parents kept keys to apartments they knew they would never return to. The disaster also transformed how the world thought about nuclear safety. Chernobyl remains a warning carved into history. Like and subscribe if this story hit differently, and drop a comment. Should we go deep on Fukushima next? Thanks for watching.